Hello again, this is Ben Hitchcock Cross talking to you today for Deliberate Indifference Wisconsin about Wisconsin's open meetings requirement here. This is a prelude to a clip of the MPS board closing the session, voting to close the session prior to discussing Dr. Holliday's, let's say, the complaint against Dr. Holliday from Calvin Fermin about his inappropriate, that is, Mr. Posley's inappropriate relationship with Marla Bronaugh. Okay? So, Wisconsin has a public meetings law, an open meetings law, that requires that all government business be done in public, except on the basis of there's 11 major and a few minor exceptions. And most of those have to do with protecting active employees from discussions about the employees that could potentially be embarrassing to the employees. So the concept, I think, in general, is to protect the janitor from accusations of that he's not doing a good job or some other thing, that record would become public, which it wouldn't necessarily become public in a private employment because of the public records law. So those kind of discussions, not the actual outcomes, if the discussions about discipline, not the actual discipline itself. So if there is a discussion about discipline and it turns out that it's a big nothing, as they say, that that information, those discussions, that is in theory what's being protected here. It definitely is the case that malfeasance is by the, let's say, the people who are high officials and those who are in the convening are closing the session. That's definitely also used to shield that. But here there still is some legal requirements here that they have to follow in order to close the session. And I think you'll see here how it's kind of comical how they just barely maintain to have a fig leaf of compliance with the law. So the first thing to keep in mind here is that everybody in this clip, all of the board and including Jaquline Mann, know exactly what they are closing the session for. They know exactly what the charges are against that Calvin Fermin has made against Posley. They know that they've secretly already hired an attorney to investigate, and I think at least some of them are aware that Posley is privately investigating here. So I think that's important to know. The second thing is that they have to, by law here, and I guess to be clear, I will disclaim that although we are going to be discussing Wisconsin law, this discussion is not intended to be legal advice because it may or may not apply to your facts. Wisconsin law applies whether you understand it or not, so consulting with an attorney is often the best way to make informed decisions. So, you have to give a notice of a closed session, meaning you have to say at least 24 hours in advance that you intend to close the session. You have to state the reasons for closing the session. So there are, like I said, 11 categories, but it's not enough to state the category. You have to give some kind of actual reason so that the public is aware of why the category fits. So you don't have to say to discuss discipline against Chief Jones, but you do need to say that we're going to go and discuss discipline against a public employee, so therefore this falls into this particular category, which is consideration of dismissal, demotion, discipline, licensing, and tenure. So that's Wisconsin Statute 1985 1B. That's that 1985 is where these exceptions are found, and the discussion for this is had. So that's something to keep in mind. I think that, again, they can talk about we're going to fire, if they're discussing firing Posley, for example, that's absolutely appropriate to do in a closed session here, but they have to give some sort of indication that that's what's going to happen. There also has to be a vote an actual vote, not just a decision in secret by, the clerk or the president or some limited part of the body to close the session. There actually has to be a vote. And again, on the way the vote needs to happen, which is part of the problem of what's going on here, is that, at the beginning, Bob Peterson just announces that they're going into closed session for these reasons. And first they try to say, well, we're going to do it in closed session to have the vote, but I think they realize they can't do that. So then Jaquline Mann says we need to have a vote. So what happens is one of the directors then says, well, I vote we go into closed session. Well, the problem is that's not really enough of a basis to go into closed session. You've got to say not just the magic words here, but you've got to say the statute, the exception, and you've got to say some basis that the public can understand what the exception is for. So, again, if they were saying we're going to talk about this stuff, I vote we go into closed session to discuss, possible termination or discipline against a public employee, that would be fine. But again, because Bob Peterson announces, as you'll see, that this is going to happen, then he's not moving that this happens, he's just noticing. So where the actual language and the notice and all of that happens is in really avoid discussion by Bob Peterson about just simply announcing. So they need to, since they are such sticklers for Robert's Rules of Order, they did fail to do that in that case. So that I think is the key thing here. Now they're all going to go into closed session there. And then finally what's going to happen is that they're going to come out of closed session and give Jaquline Mann a raise. And then I understand they're going to go back into closed session, which isn't really indicated on the video there, but apparently they're all in proximity to each other at that time, meaning they're all physically in the building, even though they're all logging in from different locations within Central Services building. And then apparently then they all meet based on the actual notice for at least 5 more hours after that to discuss what to do about Posley. So that's the thing there. That's where all this happens in secret. And, I think it's part of what we're showing here is the steps that lead into it. And that in themselves do not appear that the board is following the requirements for closing a meeting before they discussed Posley, even with the help of Dr. Mann. Well, we'll keep you informed, and as always, I appreciate your watching this. Have a great day.
The board will now retire to closed session to discuss information received in accordance with Administrative Policy 6.35. This closed session will be held pursuant to Wisconsin State Statute 19.851C, which allows a governmental body to retire to closed session for purposes of considering employment promotion, compensation, or performance evaluation data of any public employee over which the governmental body has jurisdiction or exercises responsibility. And Wisconsin Statute 19.851F, which allows a governmental body to retire to closed session in order to consider financial, medical, social, or personal histories or disciplinary data of specific persons, preliminary consideration of specific personnel problems, or the investigation of charges against specific persons which, if discussed in public, would likely to have a substantial adverse effect upon the reputation of any person referred to in such histories or data or involved in such problems or investigations. The board may reconvene in open session to take action on matters discussed in closed session, or the board may adjourn from the executive session. Madam Secretary, please note the time.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, I just want to be sure that the item that you just read the exceptions about is item number 2, which is action on a request to retire to executive session in order to consider information received in accordance with Administrative Policy 6.35 whistleblower protections, and the recommendation is that the board retire into closed session. Thank you so much for reading those exceptions into the record. And at this time, we will have a vote to consider this item in closed session, if that is your will, Mr. President.
Yes. Okay, motion, please.
I move we retire into executive session.
Second.
So noted.
Second.
Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
On Director O'Halloran's motion, seconded by Director Gokul Gandhi, to consider the information received in accordance with Administrative Policy 6.35 Whistleblower Protections pursuant to Wisconsin statutes 19.85, Parent 1, Parent C, and Wisconsin State Statutes 19.85, Parent 1, Parent F, as read into the record by President Peterson. On the motion as read, Director Carr.
Aye.
Director Garcia.
Aye.
Director Gokul Gandhi.
Aye.
Director Leonard.
Aye.
Director O'Halloran.
Aye.
And President Peterson.
Aye.
That's 6 ayes, the motion passes. And Mr. President, I will note the time of going into closed session.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.